Hi, this is Janos, this is Real World Audio, and I'm looking now at driver break-in because I think this is one subject that is of interest to many of us, that when you burn in your drivers, what is the proper way to do it? And I would say there's no proper way to do it. There's lots of different tips. Everyone does it differently, and what I have experienced in my years of breaking in drivers is that there's different ways to do it. Some of them are quick, others are slower but more effective to reaching your end goal. This might have sounded a little bit cryptic, and what I really wanted to tell about it is that there is the classic way of breaking in your drivers fast, is that have one driver in phase, another driver out of phase, and have them face each other and break them in with the same signal so they go out of phase compared to each other, and then it won't make a large sound. It will play reasonably quietly and break in very fast. You just put something on, have them play for a couple of days, crank it up, and then it will be done. That was something that actually I never really subscribed to, so I tried it out for myself, but I just had a gut feeling that this is not the best thing for the drivers, and also just to do that and leave them in the room and just leave them to play by themselves, you are not really learning much of the process. Just put it on autopilot and leave it there. And I think this is where Dave's experiment has gone wrong, because what he commented is that he got a pair of Lee-Song F6 drivers, and they were horribly sibilant, they were left to burn, and one of them burned out. And I don't know what method Dave used to burn in his drivers, but this, where he said they were horribly sibilant. So when you have a brand new drivers and you hook them up and you play them, if you hear any sibilance of them, like the slightest amount of sibilance, it means that you are playing them louder than you should be playing at that point of the break-in. That method that I started to describe, with that you just face them each other and just hit it with loud music, that usually works when you get like Servin Vegas or some speakers that can handle like terribly high wattage, and you just crank them up, break them in fast, and then there you go. But what I noticed that for single drivers, you cannot use that method at all. And when you start breaking in single drivers, they are just terribly sensitive, and you cannot put any significant wattage on them, especially in the first hour. You can ruin them if you put serious wattage, and this is especially for single drivers, like there, like where is my finger pointing? Those little guys, these are like 4.5 inch drivers, and when I started breaking them in these cabinets, then to reach the point where I can start to hear some distortion coming from them, that was really low, like playing at very low level, like barely made like conversation speech level before they started breaking up, and yep, that's the indication that that's the volume that they can handle while breaking in. And if I crank the volume higher, then they were just distorting more and getting more sibilant, but they were not getting louder. So that's how you can tell that you reached the limit that you are getting sibilance, and even though when you crank the volume higher, it doesn't become louder, just becomes more sibilant and more broken sound. It means that you are ruining your drivers, and one of them or both of them will be destroyed if you continue like that. So then the answer is to turn down the volume where all that sibilance goes away. And sometimes that volume, especially for single drivers, it can be just ridiculously low, and you might read on the spec sheet that, let's actually have a look at the sheet for these drivers. So I went on to Lisong's website for this driver mentioned, and there you go. These are some of the data for it. So it says like power 40 watt, 80 watt. So it's kind of like 40 watt continuous, 80 watt peak power handling. I think, let's see, what is the diameter of this driver? Like 6.5 inch driver. I think that's like kind of like way too much for that, and especially if you are breaking drivers this size. And let's see what's the sensitivity is rated at 93 dB per 2.8 watt per meter. So what this means is that when you have a 6-inch driver, single driver, even if it's spec'd at 40 watts, what I recommend is, like, when you start the break-in, not more than 1 watt for the first hour. Resist the temptation to go more than that, but probably even lower than 1 watt, like a half watt or quarter watt or 0.1 watt for the first hour, and just listen to it. So first, when you are breaking in these drivers, not just the Lisong, any like these are Fostexes, but if you have Sonidos or any kind, I would say Cube Audios are much more resilient to any of them. They are kind of an exception to that, but even with my Cube Audios, I did not just crank them up and go berserk on the break-in. If it's not Cube Audio, then you just go like super duper low power at it, like 0.1 watt first, and do not expect at first to hear anything but mid-range, and you will not hear anything more, most likely, and just listen to it. Am I hearing clear mid-range? And then after an hour you can crank in the volume a little bit more, and it will depend on the speaker, actual driver, different brand, different model. All of them behave differently, like how fast you can crank up the volume, but that will be your guide to put like to listen for mid-range clarity, to listen for speech and singing, how clear it is. And if you notice any sibilance, faintest sibilance on it, that's the sign that you are playing it too loud. Crank it a little bit quieter. And in the beginning, don't put anything with heavy bass on it or too much high frequencies. Just put on some easy mid-range material and break it in. Start the break-in with some nice and quiet music. Don't do any challenging. So it's kind of like when your driver is fresh out of the box, it's like a baby. And when we have a baby human being, even if he's going to become an athlete or a gymnast, when he is in the crib, we don't hit him with tasks like a triple flip in the air and then do whatnots. The first thing is just let the baby stand up and practice standing up for an hour before you take the baby out of the crib, so he can start or she can start walking around, in the playpen. And then just slowly, as the driver starts breaking in, then you increase the difficulty of the break-in. Then you give the task to be more and more challenging. Not just the mid-range, you are expanding the frequency range to include more of the bass, more of the highs, more dynamic material, and more SPL. But you do it gradually, and you use your ears as feedback, that if there's any sibilance, it's too loud. Just if you heard just a few seconds or few minutes of sibilance, don't worry, you won't harm it. Just but keep the volume down, and you will notice that maybe an hour later, now it will play at that volume without any sibilance at all. And if you keep the break-in like that, then you will be able to break in your driver to be able to play at louder volumes, wider frequency range without distortion, and better dynamic range. And when we are breaking in the driver, what happening is that we are affecting the compliance of the driver. So the driver, it has a material, and so it has the cone suspension, it has the spider in the back, and all of these have a certain rigidity. And when it's manufactured, it doesn't behave, it doesn't flex, it doesn't move, doesn't operate the same way as it does when it's broken in. So that's what the break-in process is that as the cone moves, it makes the suspension material, this part here, this is the surround, and let's see, there, maybe you can see there where the arrow is pointing, that's the spider on the bottom. So these two need to go through many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, a million times moving back and forth to reach that compliance that they have for the proper operation. And that's the break-in process. And there are some drivers where this break-in process is not as pronounced. So when you get like a big Servin Vega or like a 500 watt woofer, when it's fresh out of the box to broken in, there's not that much difference. For many 2-3-way speakers, for especially like the plastic cone drivers, you don't see that much difference, especially when using solid state amps that have a high damping factor. But when you have single drivers or other high efficiency drivers, and I include the Altex on that too, then and you use them with especially with tube amps that don't have high damping factors, so they allow you to hear much more the contribution of the surround here and the contribution of the spider. So then you will be able to observe the break-in to be a much more dramatic process compared to having big Servin Vega speaker and hook it up to a giant solid state amp with a damping factor of 10,000 or something outrageously high. And that's why there's like several camps of people, and some of them swear that there's no such a thing as break-in. And you will notice that all of these people have solid state amps with very high damping factor and new speakers that have drivers where the compliance change between the pre-break-in and the after break-in process is very little to minimal to none. And when there are people who report that there's like tremendous change for the break-in, then they use like single drivers or other very high efficiency drivers and use them with amplifiers with little to no feedback. And when you are in such a case, then the difference is just absolutely monumental. So for me, when I was breaking in these babies, these are also single driver drivers with my single-ended amp without any feedback. What I noticed in the beginning, it had trouble reproducing even simple human voice, people singing, just talking like a TV show. It couldn't even play that at a conversation level. And after a couple of weeks of break-in, it had no problem playing Bach box organ at a level where I found very enjoyable. So that's how drastic the break-in process can be when you have that type of equipment that I mentioned. However, even if you have an amplifier that has a very high damping factor, even in that case, I would still recommend to be very gentle with the break-in with high efficiency drivers. And as always, if you notice any sibilance, any distress from the drivers, it is a sign that you are distressing the driver, and it's not doesn't mean that the driver is bad, but it means that you are asking it to do something that it's not ready yet to do. And that's why I made this video, to make it easier for all of us to how to break in our drivers, because I haven't really seen any information on this on YouTube yet. Maybe there is, but I haven't seen it. So I'm really sorry that it burned out. That's really sad, but I think maybe your really bad experience can help others to avoid this. And the other part of it is that the frequency response curve, that Wizarcon speakers seem to be as lumpy as Lizzo's cellulite. And yep, let's have a look at it. How does the frequency response curve look? And it looks lumpy. And yeah, we can compare it to cellulite on celebrities, and probably that might look even nicer than what this looks like. But what I can tell about that is that this is true for every single driver, and it's not the specialty of Wizarcon speakers. Let's have a look at something that doesn't have a Wizarcon, which is a dedicated mid-range speaker. So it means that it has a much easier job to do, because it doesn't have to reproduce the whole frequency range. It will be just asked to coast, because what we are having here is that it has to reproduce the entire audible frequency range by itself. And when we look at any driver whatsoever, how they work is basically, if you take a flat line, which is your baseline, you can take a flat line for any speaker that covers like 2 or 3 octaves, not more. And within that 2 or 3 octaves, you will have plus and minus 3 dB. And that will be observed for every single loudspeaker driver available at every single price point. And when it seems smoother than that, it means that the manufacturer has applied extra smoothing on the frequency curve, and they are just hiding it. So there is no such thing as a perfectly flat response speaker driver, only the obfuscation when it occurs when the manufacturer is just applying way too much smoothing, and it seems that it's nice and smooth, like a baby skin compared to Lizzo's cellulite, but it's just as much bogus as because there's no such thing. It is just a way of presenting the facts. It's kind of like applying Photoshop on Lizzo's cellulite. So there's no such thing as a flat frequency response, only a photoshopped frequency response basically. And in that case, the software can do the photoshopping for you. And it's something like a 3rd octave smoothing or something like that, when it just mellows out everything. So now let's have a look like how bad this is. Is it like Lizzo's cellulite compared to a baby's orange skin? I mean flat skin, not orange skin. Orange skin is not good. That's cellulite skin anyway. So now this is a ScanSpeak driver, mid-range driver, much more expensive than the driver we looked before. So I am expecting to see order of magnitude better performance, especially given that this is specialized for mid-range. So the mid-range we are expecting flat, right? Can be? Maybe. That's why, because that's what we learned from, you know, manufacturers, reviews, all of the speech that we get, all of the hype and illusions. But are they reality or they are illusions? Let's have a look at the frequency response, and yup, look at that. Let me just adjust it. Okay, now I have a bad news. This looks even worse than this. Just have a look. This is absolute trash compared to this. Even when we look at the fact that we are going to use like just the mid-range frequencies, like from here to there, guys, this is even worse than the Lee audio. So I wouldn't be as critical about calling this driver's response as celluloid, because I think it's a little bit nicer than a dedicated mid-range driver's output in the mid-range. And let's compare another driver to it. Let's look at focal utopia. This is like the God coming down from the heavens. We expect flat, and they have their woofers frequency response. Look, that looks absolute rubbish as well. So there's no the legend that the drivers have a flat frequency response are that only legends. And you can expect, like coming back to either here or there, a plus minus 3 dB, like for example, like going here, can we see when we pick, like for example, this range 500 hertz through 2 kilohertz, then in that range you can see a plus minus 3 waves, basically valleys and peaks, and that's normal. That's absolutely normal. And if it's little more or little less, doesn't mean really anything, because what you would also need to know of is that, let's go back to the ScanSpeak mid-range driver. You see here there are 3 curves. There's the black, it means on axis, and then we have 30 degrees and 60 degrees off axis measurements, and each of them are different. And each of them have different dips and peaks, they roll off differently, etc. And what this tells us is that depending on the towing of your driver, it is going to change. And also these dips and over there, they are going to change as well when you mount it in the cabinet. So that's why it's important on how you mount it, the exact position where it is on your driver, the height of the driver, how wide the front baffle is it in front of the baffle or behind the baffle, how much further did you mount it. So all of those parts which are in the mid-range, like for example here, there is this big dip here that can be controlled of how you mount the driver. And I would say like that can be controlled, and with that, this little cheap lead driver, I think it is just amazingly flat. And even when I compare it to like a 2 or 3 way speakers, this is just phenomenally good. And so that's how it is. or what I have seen of these measurements. And the thing is about these frequency response measurements, this is only applicable in that room where it was measured by the amp that drove it. With a different amplifier in a different room, this is going to be looking different. So that's why I do not project more into these drawings, how flat they are, how unflat they are. The ultimate test really is in your room with your amplifier, with your in your cabinet, because these things, the unevenness actually will work. And that's why some speakers are compatible with some amplifiers, some rooms, and when you move to a different room it won't work, because these dips and the valleys and the hills, if they mesh well with your room and how your amplifier puts out the signal, then they will even out, or will get you a peak and valley that is pleasant for you with the material you are listening to. And if you put it in a different room, it has different room modes, and then it might really skew the response, how these peaks and valleys occur in your actual room. So because all of the drivers, every single driver ever manufactured, have this cellulite response, that's why there is no such single loudspeaker or single driver that works everywhere. But this is also something good. Because of this, we can sooner or later find loudspeakers that work really well in our room. And that's because our rooms have also this sort of cellulite response in them, and you just want the cellulite to meet the anti-cellulite, and when they mesh together, that's when we find perfection. And that's why when I recommend loudspeaker builds or ideas, that's why, like for example, these Lagrange speakers, when I had like feedback from about at least 20 builds, at least 20 pairs of them were built already all over the world, and most of them people were super duper happy about it. And there were like a few who said no, it didn't work for me, and it cannot, because there is not a single loudspeaker design in the world that is universal and will work in every room and every amplifier. And the reason behind that is the frequency response curve is like that, and that might match with your system and room and everything or not. And sometimes when it doesn't match, what you can do is adjust the cabinet. And by adjusting the cabinet, the position of the driver in the cabinet, the tuning frequency of the cabinet, you can make some things work better. But that's a whole different story. So that's for today, and I hope it was useful. My experiences were useful to everyone who tuned in for this fun little session. And good luck for everyone trying to break in your drivers. And just my advice again, just be patient and do not push them beyond what they want to do. It's kind of like if you have a co-worker, or treat your drivers as your employees. If you have an employee, you don't want to drive the employee to the ground. You want to provide the employee with as much task as they can handle, and don't overwork them. Over time, the employee will learn and will become more capable, will be able to handle more and more tasks. And look at the data sheet like the job description for a position in the real world, which includes a variety of tasks from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency, like a really wide range. And looking at the SPL, SPL is the amount of work, like how many reams of paper do you put on the desk of the employee, how many tasks the person needs to do. In the beginning, you cannot overload the person because they need to learn how to be on the job. Because even if you get a very capable person, like a very capable driver, even then the driver just has to become familiar how to work in your environment, how to go from I was just manufactured without any experience of moving the cone to actually being able to move the cone at the maximum of the excursion specified in the spec sheet. So I think that's what I wanted to share about driver break-in and about frequency response, and what to think about these cellulite driver data sheets, which are not just specifics of the specialty of single drivers with visor cone. It's every single driver ever made looks like that cellulite. Thank you. Bye bye.